This is episode 24 of the Discipleship Directives. This is a podcast with Dr. Dan Crawford. He is the founder and president of DiscipleAllNations.org. Besides being the founder and the director of DiscipleshipAllNations.org, he is also the professor emeritus for the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Welcome. Thank you for being here with us today. Dr. Crawford, it's a special day. We're changing the scenario. We are home.
Yes.
And I said home because we're in South Texas. And this used to be home for you. But how are you today?
I'm doing great. It's always good to be back in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas.
Well, it's good to have you every month. And we're having a chance to have a conversation with a very special person. And I want to welcome Miss Dina. And I would love for you to introduce our guest today.
I'll be glad to. Dina Silva is a longtime friend of mine. When I was the Baptist student minister at Pan American University, I found out I could have a staff member. I had met Dina probably a year before that, maybe a little before, when she was a student at the University of Mary Hardin Baylor. And so I was keeping up with her, knowing when she was going to graduate, and it all worked out where she came to be my only staff member I ever had at Pan American. I'm envious of my successors who have 9 or 10 interns working with them, but it was just Dina and I. And she's from Rio Grande City, and we kind of lost track of each other over some years, and then we reconnected, and it's been good to keep up with her and her family, and glad to have her here joining us today.
It's good to have you today, Dina. How are you?
Bendecida. Blessed to be here.
Well, it's exciting to meet you. I did not have the privilege. I knew you were coming because I get the notes from Dr. Crawford ahead of time, but I never met you before, and it's a privilege to have you and to have you join the podcast today. Give us a very brief kind of an overview. This is back in college days, Rio Grande City. You come to Pan American. I'm assuming that you came and lived in the dorms back then. You actually moved to Edinburgh to go to school?
No, I was a student at Mary Hardin Baylor.
Mary Hardin Baylor.
At Mary Hardin
Okay.
Baylor. And my BSU director and Dan are very close friends. Dan Daynard was my BSU director, and Dan was, I met him through Jan. And I think Dan has a very interesting story as to how we got to meet.
So by the time that you connect as a staff member, you already done with Mary Hardin Baylor? No.
Yes, that was interesting because the STS worker, was student to student worker, was a recent graduate, like recent May or even December, and then start working on a campus on this, as a staff member for student ministry.
Wow.
But I had already been out of Mary Hardin Baylor for 2 years. I was teaching in Rio Grande City. But Dan kept insisting that he needed someone that would be able to identify with the campus being almost 90% Latin American, Hispanic. And he kept insisting on Dina Silva. And so I came to Pan American College at that time, 2 years after I had left Mary Hardin Baylor.
Baptist institution, Mary Hardin Baylor. Mary Hardin Baylor. Oh, that's wonderful.
At that time, it was a women's university.
I've heard of that before because
Yes.
I went to school at Valley Baptist Academy, and one of my former professors from there, I remember this is early 90s, that she went to school there, and it was a women's university back then. So that's wonderful. I went to Baptist universities as well. My education was through East Texas Baptist and then Hardin Siemens. So I'm a product of Texas Baptist as a whole. And now I get to serve with Texas Baptist. You can see my shirt in here. Let me come back to you. So again, you come to the Valley on a monthly basis, and you get to reconnect with friends for many years and now pastors. But on a recent teaching session, you mentioned and you spoke on God's interruptions. So I want you to talk about it for a second from the perspective of Paul's and his missionary journey. And can you expand on that a little bit more? We have a lot of people that connect that may not be a participant of the conferences, but what about these interruptions from God?
Sure. I was using the Apostle Paul as a role model to say when you follow God's will, it includes at least these three things. And the first was divine interruptions. God tends to interrupt us when we're going full speed ahead in one direction and have us pause and go another direction. And that happened with Paul. He was on his second missionary journey. His purpose was to revisit all the places he had been on his first journey. He was well along with that, and all of a sudden, in the book of Acts, it says that God stopped him, and he had to go down to Troas. And in the middle of the night, he has a vision of a man of Macedonia asking him to come that direction. And Paul, hearing from God during this interruption, received a revelation. So there's the second point I said: interruption, revelation, and direction. God interrupts, God reveals. With Paul, he heads to Macedonia, turning the gospel westward, which is an interesting dynamic, because if he'd have gone back like he was planning eastward, we in North America might be receiving missionaries instead of sending them. But he actually turned the gospel westward and to the ends of the earth of that day, which was Spain. They thought that was the border. You'd fall off the edge of the earth if you went further. So the gospel moved westward because of that one incident where God interrupted, and then God revealed, and then God directed.
He's giving us some sort of a pattern on God's interruption, and then revelation, and then guidance or direction. Just listening to your brief testimony, graduating from Harlem Baylor, coming home, and then connecting. So, did you feel or thought back then, and even now looking back, that God interrupted you from your teaching, desire or assignment? Because you went teaching, right? You finished college and went into teaching, but then did God interrupt the teaching, and then you ended up coming up and serve with the BSU back then? How would you?
Hindsight is the best sight. Looking back now, I didn't know what was coming. At that time, I had lost my father. I had lost my father in February, and then my boyfriend was killed in Vietnam in August.
Wow.
So I was going through a very difficult time with grief, and this opportunity came up. So I prayed and I asked the Lord, am I supposed to do this? Is this what you want me to do? And I stood in front of a mirror and I felt like I needed to talk to myself. And as I was praying and asking the Lord about this, peace and calm came into my heart, into my mind. And things just started coming into place. It was a process. At that time, I really couldn't understand. But looking back, I can see how the Lord interrupted, guided, and protected. At that time, I celebrated my 25th birthday, and we joked about, oh, I'm a quarter of a century old. And here I am today, 3/4 of a century old, and still friendship and reminiscing about how the Lord blessed us 50 years ago and how he has continued to bless, provide, guide, and protect. And the times that he has interrupted have been just at the right time, just at the right, precise time.
Now, you're looking at a 50-year friendship somewhere in there. So it's a lot easier to look back and come to some of these affirmations. My assumption, like anyone else, the challenge is when you're going through them, when you're in the midst of those transitions and experiences and things like that. So I wanted to do a quick follow-up question with you because you already touched on that. But during your time serving with Dr. Crawford, Pan American, any memories, any specific, incident or experience that you can bring into the conversation today, serving alongside in the student ministry and being on a staff, first staff member, right? That's what you said, first staff member. Can you give us a quick story on something that may taking place back then?
Dan's creativity was so awesome to me that I had a difficult time keeping up with him. I really don't know how he was able to coordinate a group going to work with children in a colonia, a group doing music, a group doing impromptu plays. And the BSU was a home for some of the kids, some of the students that were there. But each one, there were activities that Dan created that they could participate in. Each one had a place. Each one had something to do. And I really admired his quiet eye. He had his eye on a student and he said, this student needs this. And then he said, Dina, I would like for you to work with this student in this area. And then said, Dina, I would like for you to lead a conference with the students on prayer. And I looked at him and I said, on prayer? But and he said, here's a book. And he said, get ready. On Friday, you will be in charge. So it was always having to work, having to study, having to prepare. And that was such a blessing to me.
Yeah.
Because I was able to do that the rest of my life in the churches where I worked, in the communities that I have served.
So that was your seminary training.
That was my seminary training.
On.
And that was something that when I finished Mary Hardin Baylor, I thought, should I go to seminary or should I go to teach? The road not taken.
You got both.
Yes,
You
the
went to
road
teaching,
not
you got
taken
to-
was the seminary, but the Lord said, hey, you
Yes,
missed
you are.
this,
Yes,
now you
are.
have to go to Dan
Yes,
Crawford.
you are. Yes, you did.
And there I was. There I was.
Well, that's wonderful. My goodness. Every podcast that we do, and you bring some of these guests, obviously, it's just an unbelievable experience on what you guys and what the Lord has done through the ministry. Thank you for sharing. This is just amazing. Any thoughts on what you just heard and were reminded? Because she just took you back into those
Yes.
experiences.
And then she alluded earlier into 2 years before.
Mm-hmm.
She actually joined me on staff when my college friend and longtime friend, Jan Daynard, who's been with Baptist General Convention of Texas and Dallas Baptist University, he was the director at the University of Mary Hardin Baylor. Took a group of students, girls, to Monterey to work in a children's ranch, El Rancho del Rey, maybe that was it. Anyway, he said, I need some Spanish-speaking people, and you need to provide them for us. So I recruited some of my Spanish-speaking students, and we crossed the border together. But we were taking an iron bell, church bell, to this children's home. At that time, it was against the law to take that kind of metal across the border. But Jan said, we need to get it down there. I said, all right, here's the way we're going to do this. We're going to put it in the trunk of my car. I'll be the lead car. We got, I think, 5 or 6 carloads of students. And I want the prettiest girls you have who can speak Spanish and are not ashamed to talk and, interact with the border guards, and you put them in my car. He said, all right. And I think Dina was in the car. Anyway, I told those girls, I don't care what you say. I won't be understanding it anyway. You talk to these guys. We're not coming back this way. So you tell them whatever you want to tell them. Don't let them in the trunk. That if you have to lay on top of it, do not let them get in the trunk of this car. And I mean, we pulled up to the border and they turned on the charm. I didn't understand what they were saying, but I was embarrassed. They were really turning on the charm. And the border guards were loving it, of course, and this is going on. And all of a sudden, they just motioned all 6 or 7 cars through. They didn't check any of us. They didn't look at anybody's luggage. They didn't ask for any passports. They come on through.
So the third one is direction. So God gave you direction.
He did. That's, I mean, we had our plan and we stuck with it. And Dina was a part of it. And I said, I need her to come and work with me full time. That was the beginning of it.
And the rest is history.
The rest is history.
Oh my goodness. You remember that story, obviously.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Like yesterday. Okay, so let me just ask you, because I'm going back to this interruption from the Lord and then the revelation. One thing that is taught in my mind when you spoke about it is that sometimes that revelation doesn't come the very next day.
Right.
And I'm thinking to myself, that is so hard, because that's where you get those gaps that they feel like eternity. Because you want to be faithful to the Lord, but you've been quote unquote interrupted. And it's like, Lord, I thought that you and I, we had an agreement. I was going to play, and He's not playing that way. So you brought up some stories into your presentation, and I'd love for you to expand on the stories that you brought in, especially with the power story. As we close our podcast, can you share with us a little of those?
Well, I'm not sure which stories you want me to share.
Well, I remember you speaking, with the great stories, the experience that you have during the years at POW, and you spoke of Jimmy's overnight.
Oh yeah, okay,
Eric.
yeah, and one thing that was so impressive to me, primarily because it was from Dina's hometown of Rio Grande City, we offered free luncheons on Thursdays, I think, for the students, or maybe it was 50 cents or something, it was cheap, with Bible study. But that they would come, we'd feed them, and the way we fed them without having to spend money was the ladies in the churches, as they still do to this day. The ladies brought food in, different church every week. And 1 week a semester, the ladies from First Baptist Church of Rio Grande City came. And we always had the biggest crowd on those days, because the way God was revealing this, how to reach more students, was to invite these ladies to come, because they would get up early in the morning and kill the chickens, fry the chickens.
Literally, you're talking about literally, that they killed the chickens?
Yes.
Okay.
And bring them for lunch. Those chickens never saw a refrigerator. They died early in the morning, and they entered the students at lunch. And when the students would find out that Rio Grande City was coming, we had a crowd. And so, if that works, you work it. So we tried to get those ladies to come as often as we could, because that's when we had the students. That's when the students heard the Bible taught.
Yeah.
And for many of them, that was maybe the only time in a week or a month that they would hear biblical stories. So that interruptions, yes, interruptions in the lives of the students. They come over to hear the Bible taught, because God had revealed to us, here's a method. Use this.
So you reminded us that when it comes to interruptions, when it comes to even the revelation, but specifically the direction, the stories that you guys brought to the podcast today, which are extremely valuable, it has one thing in common. It is the concept of community. You're describing in ministry as you are doing ministry, as you are serving others with others. And I will say that some of the most difficult experiences in life is when you feel or you go through the interruption in life, but you're doing it by yourself. Because no one is that good to really figure things out on your own. Or even if the interruption may not be a pleasant one. Sometimes it's a pleasant one, and you coming and connecting with Dr. Crawford back then, obviously it worked. It was a good thing. But sometimes the interruptions are not very pleasant. And even though the Lord is there, again, the challenge many times is that you're doing it on your own. And having you today here, Dina, it's a blessing. It's a pleasure to meet you.
It's a pleasure.
And thank you for your faithful service to the Lord. And I can see that the discipleship of 50 years ago worked, because here we are. We got 3 young adult students. You met one earlier, and they have been impacted by BSN ministry tremendously. So thank you for everything that you guys do. We were grateful for that. And folks, this is all for us today. Thank you for joining the podcast. And once again, the website is discipleallnations.org. Love for you guys to either like or share this podcast. That's always a blessing, and it helps us to promote and continue the conversation to the nations, sharing the message of Jesus Christ. We love you guys. Thank you, and have a great day.
This is episode number 3 of Discipleship. This is Directives podcast.